Installing a pickup and wiring harness in a Les Paul Junior. Coming up. Okay, new pickup and wiring harness in a Les Paul Junior. Why, you ask? Well, although the Les Paul Junior is a deceptively simple guitar, in order to get the most tonally out of it, you really need to have the flexibility, full flexibility tonally out of the pickup and the wiring harness. Now this guitar is a current production Les Paul Junior, not the historic reissue version. In fact, I'm not even sure they make one right now. But the feel of it is really quite good when compared to a vintage Les Paul Junior. But there's a few things they miss. The current production pickup in it is wax potted, and the wiring harness does not have vintage specs. We're going to change that out of this guitar, and that'll get us the full response of a vintage Les Paul in this guitar. The harness that came with this guitar is wired in what is called modern Les Paul wiring, and also the value of the potentiometers is not correct for a vintage Les Paul Junior. The arrangement for the pickup in a Les Paul Junior mounts this Dogear pickup directly to the body. And if it's wax potted, you don't get the benefit of the acoustic response of the guitar coming through the pickup, which you do with an unwax potted pickup. So we're going to put the ThroBak pickup in here, the 7.8K ThroBak P90-DE Dogear pickup, and our Les Paul Junior wiring harness with a Luxe 0.022 UF Bumble Bee capacitor with 500K CTS pot for volume, 250 for the tone, and that is the vintage value. And we'll wire it up too, correct for 50s. So let's get to that video. Okay, we've got our Les Paul here. I've taken one knob off. We're going to take the strings off and have everything stripped so we can get the pickup out and also get the wiring harness out. These knobs can often be a challenge to get off, so I will attempt to show you how to do it with a towel. So hold on here. Okay, if you get a towel, kind of work the edge of it underneath the knob. Often these knobs are on there very tight, and you can kind of give it a little twist. Work it back and forth a little bit, wobble it back and forth. Watch, it's not, this one's not going to cooperate. There we go. So you get the concept there. You try to get the edge of the towel underneath the knob there, and you can get enough force on it to pull it off. Okay, the next step is here we're going to flip it over, and let's see what we have to work with in the control cavity. All right, it always helps to have a nice little Phillips head screwdriver for these. If you do this often, getting a small one that has a little sort of rotating top to it makes it easy to pull them out. So also with something like this, it's always helpful, make yourself a little handle with some tape to pull that out. All right, so the wiring we have here is not 50s wiring. And the first step I suggest too is whenever you're doing any sort of work like this, make sure you take a photograph of the internals before you start unsoldering stuff. In case you ever want to put it back, you'll have that as a reference. So I'll do that. All right, so before we start unsoldering, let me give you a quick rundown of the tools we're going to use. I'm going to use a small needle nose plier, small fine cutting wire cutter, and to get the pots out, I'm going to use this Cruise Tools handy guitar tool that has sockets for different common guitar nut sizes. So again, we photographed the inside of the control cavity there, and we will start unsoldering some of these connections. We have our ground for the tailpiece, and we also have a ground here that bridges the volume pot and the tone pot, and then of course the ground for the pickup and the connections here for the tone to the tone pot and also for the pickup. So this is a modern wiring version, and I believe they're using, I'm almost positive here, instead of the vintage arrangement, they're using 500K here, which is correct value, but 500K here as well, should be 250K. The harness we're going to put in will be our harness that is vintage spec, 500K, 250K, and also the .022 Bumblebee capacitor wired according to vintage. Okay, so the soldering iron I'm using here is an 85-watt soldering iron. And we really you want to have something at least 60 watts, because any lower than that, you'll actually spend too much time heating up these soldering joints, which will have the effect of heating up the components too much, and you run the risk of these failing. So again, with soldering, it's always a good idea to tin the tip. Oh, and one thing I like to do here too is put a towel down, just in case some stray solder might get on the finish. It'll just be caught by the towel. So let's start by unsoldering this ground wire. Make sure you can see that. That's the ground wire for the tailpiece. All right, so we have the tailpiece wire loose. And let's get these other connections loosened up. It's a bit tight. Tin the tip here a little bit, make sure we have enough solder to transfer the heat well. Okay, we have everything clear there. This is the wire for the jack, and there's the wire for the pickup. All the rest of these connections are just between the volume and tone pots. Okay, let's flip this over and loosen the strings here first before we remove them. Again, let's put a towel down just to be safe. And also remember, since this is wraparound tailpiece, when these strings come off, this may slide right off. Put this down to protect your finish. And move that. Now again, we'll get our small screwdriver here, small Phillips head screwdriver. And take the cover off. These screws for the cover are also what hold the pickup in place. So want to save those. And although our ThroBak P90 will come with some screws, I would suggest use the original screws that came with your guitar. No sense in running the risk that you may cut new threads. Those parts I would reuse. Okay, so we have our original Gibson P90 here. I'm going to guess this is wax potted. And yes, it is. So we're going to replace that with one of our ThroBak Dogear P90s. Now the cover here, we can reuse that, but the ThroBak P90s, come with our butyrate cover, and a wiring diagram here. We're going to use that to make sure we get everything back together right. 50's style. That with the 500K, 250K tone pot. We have, well, a few little goodies here. A authentication card that I suggest people put in their guitar case just so they know what's in their guitar, and this will be a good record for that. And here's our vintage reproduction P90 ThroBak butyrate covers here. Say ThroBak in there. Our bobbins, pull screws, base plate copied from vintage. This one's 7.8K with long A4 magnets, so unpotted. It's going to have the full dynamic response that an original 50's Les Paul would have. So before we do the pickup though, let's get the wiring out of the guitar. This is pretty simple. We'll take, just loosen the nuts here. And then drop it out of the back of the control cavity. And I tend to save these too, although our harness will comes with nuts and washers. The guitar is used to these, particularly the washers. So I'm just going to reuse these nuts and washers. All right. So again, this jack wire stays in the guitar, and the actual pot and capacitor assembly comes out. So we'll put ours in, and just briefly you can see part of the difference here is, beyond the value of this pot, is they have the tone capacitor wired a modern style rather than going to this lug of the tone pot, and this maintains the vintage response that everybody associates with a vintage P90. So we'll take this off of the board that is supplied with our wiring harness. And I'll just put the Gibson harness back on this board. We'll save that just for the sake of originality if anybody wants it in the future. Now again, this is labeled volume tone. We want to keep that separate. Once it gets off this little plate, we want to make sure we know that that orientation is maintained. We can check it against the wiring layout here as well. All right, we've got the old harness back on this board. We'll save that. Now let's get on to putting the ThroBak harness into the guitar. These star washers need to be in there to keep the pots from spinning, but also to make sure it's in the right height once it's back in the guitar. So this takes a little juggling. There we go. Keep my hand under there while we get these started. Now you might have, your guitar might have the pointer washers. Actually, maybe at a later date I'll put them on this guitar. This guitar is actually, feels a lot like a vintage Les Paul Junior, but it's missing appointments like that, I assume, to distinguish it from a historic reissue, but a little bit of tweaking, and this guitar is going to be way closer to 50 spec. Okay, so let's make sure we have everything arranged there as far as where these are situated. And then we'll tighten up those pots just to where they're just snug. I don't want to overdo it. I'm putting my hand back there to just make sure they're not spinning. But that star washer will stabilize it. All right, make sure everything's still where we want it. I'm not sure how clearly this is going to be able to be shown, but what we need to accomplish here is, and I've helped it out a bit. The harness comes with some starter solder spots here on the back of the volume and tone pots, but we need to get this jack wire grounded on the back of the tone pot, bridging to the volume pot via these two spots it was previously done. And then I need to get the jack wire here to the middle lug, and then we'll fish the pickup through. Pickup wire goes there. We also have to make sure to get this ground wire to the back of the pot. So let's start with this connection on the tone pot. Some little needle nose pliers and also maybe a little wood stick will come in handy. Also, always when soldering, keep cleaning the tip. Make sure you have a nice clean surface on the tip of the soldering iron so that you can get some nice shiny solder on there so it transfers the heat well. Enough flow, just maybe a tiny bit more on the back of this pot. Okay. Let's hold that. Make sure it's cooled down. I'm going to shift this capacitor out of the way gently so we have room for the ground there and also the connection to the lug of the pot. I'm going to start with the connection to the lug. We intentionally leave that eyelet on the center lug tacked on, the capacitor tacked on with solder, but the hole is still open so we can pass the wire right through. All right, now we want to get both the ground wire here and the braid on the jack wire. I want to get both of those soldered down. The previous harness had these connections on the bottom, which actually I think makes it even trickier to do. So, and generally with a vintage one, you're going to see these near the top part of the pots. So that's how we supply this harness. Okay, after a little bit of manipulation, I've got some downward pressure on that ground wire. I'm going to start with that. Hopefully that downward pressure will keep it oriented when we solder the braid. Okay, let's put a little bit of extra solder on the braid here for the jack wire. Get our Actually, this is where a stick probably is going to be handy. Just a little wooden stick. Get in there and get some pressure downward on it. When everything flows, we'll just hold everything in place while it cools. There we go. Okay, so let's just take a look here real quick. Compare it against our diagram. Everything looks set to go. And let's get the pickup wire through there. Okay, so here's our pickup. Again, 7.8 ThroBak pickup. We've got a lot of extra lead here. But your choices here for the cover are, we can use our cover, which is again butyrate and a closer match. Well, it's a dead-on repro of a vintage cover. The Gibson cover is very nice, but I don't believe it's butyrate. I don't think it really makes a difference in this case, but of course, save this. You could use it with our pickup, no problem. But let's put the ThroBak cover on. And like with a vintage pickup, there's a gate end, which is the end that the plastic is injected into the mold. Leaves a slight little imperfection on the edge there. So let's put that towards the pick guard. Let's fish the wire through. Pull the excess through. All right, we have the pickup in here, and I want to mention this before we get the cover on. One reason it's important to have this pickup unpotted is with the Les Paul Junior, the pickup is mounted directly to the body via this base plate. These ears connect right into the body. So if it's unpotted, you're going to maintain the mechanical resonance that you get through the body of the guitar, transmitting through the pickup. If it's wax potted, that is eliminated. You don't get any of that resonance from the body of the guitar coming through the pickup. And part of the sound of a vintage one is the resonance you actually get from the body through the pickup. So this maintains that, and it's part of what makes the Les Paul Junior unique is that you have this direct body connection with the way the pickup's mounted. So let's put the cover on. We'll put the gate end towards the pick guard, and also we'll reuse these screws. And if you have a hard time finding a screw, one of mine was stuck to the back of the base plate of the old pickup. So again, we're reusing these original screws. Does come with screws. We make them a little larger because depending upon the guitar, you may need those, but use the original screws if you've got them. Okay, just make these snug. Don't have to be super tight. Part of the advantage of a smaller screwdriver like this is too, you get a little bit better feel for how tight the screws are. It's harder to over tighten with something like this also. All right, let's turn this over. Now all we have left to do is make the pickup connection here, solder the braid to the back of the pot, solder the lug to the volume pot, or solder the pickup wire to the volume pot lug on the bottom there. So let's start with the center conductor connection to the volume pot lug right there. And let's leave just a little bit of extra. Now again, this is pushback wire, so the purpose of this is we're going to push back the braid far enough that we have room for this connection here, and far enough away from the center conductor so that we don't ground out the pickup inadvertently with a strand from the grounded shield. That happens sometimes, and if you don't know that that's potential, it just might happen to you, but just push back that braided shield and it'll be fine. So too, with a pickup connection like this, you want a bit of a mechanical connection there, but it doesn't need to be totally wrapped around the lug. You want it to have some pressure on it, but you don't really need it to be really locked on there, because the solder will glue it in place, but you want to have a little bit of mechanical tension on that lug. So I bend around that wire just to have a little pressure with the center wires on the lug of the pot. Now let's do the braided shield to the back of the pot there. I'm going to tin the shield just a little bit before we get started with that. So it's got a little starter solder on it. We already have some on the pot. This wiring harness comes supplied with that just to make it a little bit easier to get together. Okay. I'm going to use my wooden stick here again. See if that'll do the trick. I think we are good there. Yeah. All right. Got a little piece of solder there. It came off the solder we used, so take that out. All right, I'm going to get this back together, put the plate back on here, string it up, and we will see how it sounds. All right, so we're back. We've got the guitar with the ThroBak P90 installed, Dogear P90, and the 50's wiring harness, our 50's wiring harness. And I'll play a little bit. I think the benefit of this guitar, and people that really get into Les Paul Juniors, is that you can get a very wide range of tones out of just the one pickup through manipulating the volume and the tone control. And that, with a mix of different amps and different pedals, you can cover any playing style you want with just this one pickup. I'll do the best I can to demonstrate that, but there's some people that are masters at manipulating a Les Paul Junior and getting a shocking amount of tones out of them with just simple manipulation. So, okay, one more detail before we start playing this guitar is pull screw adjustment. Since this is a Dogear P90, you cannot adjust the pickup up or down. It's mounted right to the body. So to adjust volume output of individual strings and to adjust the power of the pickup, you have to do it with pull screw adjustment. So this guitar I have adjusted to 3 millimeters for the distance from the top of the crown of the adjustable pull screw to the bottom of the string. The range I suggest is 3 to 2 millimeters, depending on the guitar. If it's a 2-pickup guitar like a Les Paul Special, like the one I have on the wall there, that guitar, the bridge pickup is adjusted to 2 millimeters, the neck is to 3, and that balances out those 2 pickups in that guitar a little better. The lower pull screw adjustment for the neck gives it a bit more clarity and just a bit less output, a little less boomy, and the bridge, having it 2 millimeters for that guitar, gives it a bit more power relative to the neck, which is what you want. For this guitar though, just the one pickup, the 3 millimeter seems to be about the right spot for clarity and power for this guitar. But anyway, I would suggest a starting point maybe 2 millimeters to 3 millimeters. Adjust up and down for individual strings. Higher will give you more power. It'll make the treble a bit more strident. Lower will reduce the power a little bit and tame the treble a bit. And within that 2 to 3 millimeter range, it's not a huge difference in output, but it's noticeable, and you can adjust the treble response just a bit within that range. All right, let's get on to playing this guitar. I'm really not the master at the manipulation of the knobs with this. I usually, again, just put around 7 or 8. Start playing. Clean up a little bit, roll it back. Blues driver. Full volume. Okay, well, you get a bit of the idea of the range of the tones you can get out of this with just one pickup and just a volume and tone knob. But anyway, if you liked the video and you found it helpful, please click like, click the bell, and you'll get notifications of future videos. And once again, thanks for letting ThroBak be part of your search for great guitar tone.